Fantastic. So welcome everyone to the Engaging Generational Differences to Create a Harmonious Workplace. It's great to see you here. I want to first of all just say a big thank you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Any of you who made donations, they will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teenagers. And if anyone wants to find out more about Rocking Your Teens, my colleague Tanya will add the URL into the chat for you. So if you don't know me, my name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer. And together with my team, we deliver impactful development to support those from underrepresented groups to progress in the workplace, as well as supporting majority group leaders to make inclusion happen. My latest practical and empowering book is Equality versus Equity, Tackling Issues of Race in the Workplace. And again, my colleague Tanya will add the link into the chat. So today we're talking about generational differences. And according to the government statistics, 76% of working people, that's people 16 to 64 years old, are employed. Now, if they're employed, that means they're all in our workplaces, from those who are school leavers to those who are 65 or beyond. They're all in our workplaces. And we need to work out how to get on with each other, how to make the most of each other, how to leverage what we bring. We're going to talk about some of the generations today. So just so you know, Gen Z are people who were born between 1995 and 2012. That might be some of you. There are millennials, those who are born between 1980 and 1994. Generation Xers, that's me, born between 1965 and 1979. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, and the silent generation, those between 1927 and 1945. Now, we don't want to stereotype anyone. You know, some of us don't fit into the mold. So even though I'm a Generation Xer, I might have some of the behaviors of a Generation Z or of the silent generation. But one thing we do know is that diversity is a great asset. It can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts sometimes if not properly managed. And so in today's session, we're going to really talk about the importance of engaging with generational differences and providing practical tips on how you create that harmonious workplace. We're going to have the wonderful Joseph, Geeta, Janice, and Marie all listed in the Diverse Coaching Directory, a directory that connects corporate organizations with coaches from the global majority or ethnically diverse backgrounds. And they'll be sharing all of their knowledge, all of their expertise to really help you. So do take notes, do engage in the chat, do share on social media. And my colleague Tanya will add links to their profiles in the chat. We're going to use the hashtag multigenwork. So feel free to tag the speakers, use the hashtag, and share that you're engaging in this webinar and also the learning that you get from this webinar as well. But those of you who have attended our sessions before know that we always start with a poll. So our first poll is asking, which generation do you belong to? So do just click on the answer that is you, and it won't tell me who says what, so don't worry, I won't know. And the second poll asks, which generations do you interact with most in the workplace? So the first one will be, you'll only answer one because that's the generation that you belong to. But the second, you might be mixing with multiple generations. So feel free to tag as many as are appropriate. And there's one last question. What made you attend today's session? Was it about managing or working with a multi-generational team? Was it difficult? Was it that you find it difficult to work with some colleagues? Was it you just want to be as inclusive as possible and be aware of your blind spots? Or was it that you've experienced age discrimination and want to know what to do about it? Or something else? And if it's something else, feel free to type it in the chat so that we can make sure we understand what it is. So 75% of you have completed the poll so far. I always like it to get to 85. So I'll give you a minute just for those last few to respond. Okay, we are at 95%. This is impressive. Breaking records here, everyone. And I'm going to share the results. So hopefully you'll see them on your screen. The most people we have here are Generation Xers, followed closely by baby boomers. And then we have an equal amount of Generation Z and millennials. We don't have anyone from the silent generation. They're being silent. Then which generations do you most interact with? Generation Xers, then millennials, then Generation Z, then baby boomers, excuse me, and lastly, the silent generation. And what made you attend today? So the highest response was just want to be as inclusive as possible and be aware of my blind spots. Next is managing or working with a multi-generational team, followed equally by finding it difficult to work with some colleagues. And I have experienced age discrimination and want to know what to do about it. And lastly, other. Okay, so that's giving us a great picture of who is here and what you're experiencing. And I'm just seeing if there's anything in the chat that I need to be aware of. No. So wonderful. Thank you all for introducing yourselves as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. And we are going to go into starting this webinar now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask our wonderful coaches to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to ask some specific questions, and then I'm going to open it up to you as the audience to ask some questions as well. If at any point you have a question, just feel free to type it into the chat. We will come to it at the end. You don't have to save it to the end to put your questions into the chat, because if you're anything like me, if you do that, you might forget the question you were going to ask. So over to you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with Joseph. Please introduce yourself. And I want to know as well what you love about being in your particular generation that you're in.
Nice. Thank you, Jenny. So I'm Joseph Obona. I am a baby boomer, which I just realized was coined because of the numbers of my generation in the US at a particular time. And actually, until recently, they were the most populous. I have a millennial and a Gen Z daughter, one millennial, one Gen Z. I'm a leadership and executive coach who treasures wisdom, love people surprising themselves, and value strategic thinking. I coach Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. I haven't coached any silent generation on any Gen Alphas, which I just discovered exists. So I'm very glad to be here. And what do I love about being my generation? I think it's about I could play. Growing up, I could play. You know what? I could play outside. And I loved being able to do that, play outside. There wasn't so much concern about safety. And I took some risks that would worry many parents these days.
That sounds like that's for another webinar, but we're curious. We're definitely curious, Joseph. Geeta, please tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Firstly, Jenny, thank you for this opportunity to discuss this very interesting topic. I'm Geeta Ramachandran. I am a leadership and executive coach. I also work as an agile coach and as a change agent within organizations for creating culture transformation and team transformation. I'm a Gen X, and in my work as an enterprise coach, I have come across multiple generations. I'm not so sure whether any of them were silent generation, but definitely baby boomers and above, I'm sure. And something that I value being part of the Gen X, we seem to be at a fantastic crossroad between having gained enough wisdom and still being curious about what else there is to learn from the younger generation. I feel like I'm in the crossroad moment at this time in my life. And my curiosity in generational difference was triggered in 2017, pre-COVID, when I read a HR study about where they surveyed about 1,800 baby boomers. And they said, what was it that they would like more from the workplace? And that got me thinking. And that made me more mindful of what we could do to tap that. And it's like in other areas of diversity, we say see color. Now we're saying see age in a positive light. So that's something that I'm really interested in for that reason.
Love that. Thank you so much. And Janice, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Janice Taylor, and I'm a career coach. I'm based down in Brighton, and I work with people who want to gain some sort of clarity and direction around their careers. And I was just looking at the list. I think in terms of the generations, I think I've met privately, I think I've worked mainly with millennials as a career coach, but corporately, probably more with the Generation X, I would say, just roughly, and with the occasional Gen Z. And I've always enjoyed working perhaps with the younger generations because of their energy. And also I appreciate their determination to work on their terms. And I really value that, actually. But I'm a baby boomer. So, and it's interesting listening to what Joseph was saying, because you just reminded me, Joseph, of the game we did used to play. And I'm not advocating that people go out and do this, but we used to play Knockdown Ginger when I was younger. So I'll just stop there.
Everybody's just outing themselves today on this this session. Over to you, Marie, last but definitely not least. Don't forget to unmute.
There you go. Thank you, Jenny. I'll start again. I have a creative and entrepreneurial background. So I've worked in environments where they've been extremely kind of pressurized. And I know that a lot of people here have probably experienced that too. I experienced a lot of continual burnout. And so I decided when enough was enough that I'd train and develop some skills that I could actually manage myself better in that space. So I could be more productive, so I could actually manage my stress levels, and also this whole thing about work-life balance. So I was really into doing that. I also saw this pattern that was happening with some of my businesses that I was working with when I was working as a business coach in the East End of London, and also with some of the organizations that I currently work with. And when they engage my services as a well-being executive coach, it's around resilience. It's around psychological safety. It's around mental fitness, and well-being strategies for personal and professional development. So yes, I still use my creative skills when I'm coaching, drawing and collaging, and that really helps with stress release. In terms of the kind of clients that I work with, I would say silent generation is the only generation that I haven't worked with, and I would love to engage with the silent generation because I just love experience. A wealth of experience is about growing and learning from others, and that's what I would say about that. I'm a Gen X, and what I love about being a Gen X is we're in the middle. We're in the middle of seeing a lot of history, a lot of inventions, a lot of new things happening, a lot of exciting things. And we're also, I even remember when the internet came on board and when all that. So also experiencing all that and all the new things that are coming as well. So that's what I say I enjoy so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you just reminded me. I remember the first time using a mouse. Gosh, I couldn't control this mouse. It was the arrow was flying across the screen, and I thought I was never going to master it. And yeah, it's amazing how much every generation goes through, how much change. So I want to start straight onto the questions. You all bring a wealth of experience in working with different generations from your own perspective, from all of your experiences as coaches. So my first question to you is, how has age and the multiple generations shown up as challenging for clients that you work with? You're working with people in organizations in different sectors. What are the challenges that they are experiencing? I'm curious, and hopefully they'll resonate with some people here on this webinar. I'm going to start with you, Marie.
So with one of the clients that I've worked with, whose SLT, the senior leadership team, were kind of 100% Generation X, and say 70% of the employees were around were millenniums and Gen Zs. When that company was going through a growth spurt, there was challenges around unrealistic expectations because it was very dynamic company. It's very young. It was very fresh. A lot of things were going on there. But the millennials and Generation X felt that they would naturally be progress into roles that they probably didn't even know about because they were just new roles that were coming up because of the growth of the company. So there wasn't the experience there, if you like. But it was great, that energy that they felt they could actually do that, and they wanted to be a part of that. Also in terms of the sort of skills, the skills that they were bringing to the table as well. They needed a bit more kind of like experience, developing more skills as well, more training. And also, when I was just talking about, you know, the silent generation, there's something about the wealth of knowledge that people bring with them. And that space for the millenniums and the Generation X's, Z's, to actually to be fed with that is very important. So what happened in this organization, we had to look at ways of supporting the teams to think about training and how important that was, to think about expectations and how where they are right now, what were they capable of, their capabilities as well. So it was kind of like identifying a lot of things, and also some 360 feedback, some continual 360 feedback about where you are right now and where you want to go and what is possible.
Thank you. You made me think quite a lot there about the fact that we have so much at our fingertips. We can think we're an expert at everything, that we know it all. Yeah, I can ask any question to AI or Google, and actually I'll get an answer. But that isn't the same as experiencing it, as working through it, as really understanding it. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that there can be challenges there with a knowledge gap. People thinking that they know more than they do because they might know it theoretically, but they haven't lived it. And yeah, so thank you. That's a really interesting insight. Joseph.
Thank you, Jenny. So so often older people in the organizations are seen by the younger people as too slow in doing things, unwilling to embrace the uncertainty that we live in now. So they want certain things, more certainty, and sort of new technology are often think they can't do it, and that some of their skills are outdated, and that they don't understand the young people, nor are they willing to make it easy for the young people to come up through the ranks and to lead, similar to what something Marie just said there. And young people, on the other hand, are often sometimes perceived as lacking engagement with the work that they're doing. Why should I do this? What's in it for me, kind of thing, rather than follow the path that's been laid down. And so this can be quite a challenge for managers to engage with, all the managers to engage with. How do you get someone who says, no, it's not for me? How do you engage with them? And again, around commitment to follow a path. In the past, you had almost like an apprenticeship, and then you'd go for a long time along a career. And many of the young people are not interested in that. They want to get as much experiences as they can. And this can be a challenge for the manager who's trying to engage them to stay in the job. And then it shows up as retention, that people will leave jobs after a few years, sometimes not even a few years, if they feel it's not for them, or it's upsetting their life balance, they will move somewhere else. So they're taking care of themselves. But for the person who's managing them, how do you get this person? I want you to stay to get benefit of the knowledge and experience and build it up so that you can then form new things. But they're not thinking in that same way. And so that can be the kind of challenge that shows up for managers and for the people who are looking at the young people who are not managers, who are looking at this setup and thinking, I want to contribute, but on my own terms, but you're not letting me. So that managing that dynamic can be a challenge for an organization.
Yeah, as I listened to you, I had this image in my head of the manager saying, take the stairs step by step. And the person from another, excuse me, from a younger generation saying, I'm taking the escalator, I'll meet you up there. You know, that sort of mismatch that can happen within our organizations. You know, you've really articulated that really beautifully. Thank you. Geeta, any insight from you? Just don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. I have noticed 4 or 5 challenges when I've observed different generations working together and with what the organization expects as well. There was in an older generation, either baby boomer or a silent generation, I'm not sure where that senior leader fit. And he would never engage in an instant sort of communication platform like Slack or anything that was transient in nature. And it was really hard for people to reach him because everybody was used to interacting on that platform and he never would. And then when I had a one-to-one chat with him, he remarked to me, you know, I cannot bear it that people write something and then they go delete it. I prefer emails where if I send it, it's sent and you cannot do anything about it. And that really, it was an aha moment for me because I had never looked at it from that angle before. And the transience of the communication, on one hand, it's good, but he was looking at it another way. And this, another organization that believed in doing things differently, they completely removed email as a possible communication platform in the organization. They said, we only use Slack. And there were a multitude of people. As a coach, when I spoke to a multitude of people, they were struggling with that. They simply could not adapt. So often the how we communicate and what platform we use is somewhere where the generational awareness and mindfulness and the points that they bring, we could keep in mind. And there is another challenge I've noticed is I work as an agile coach as well. And often teams comprise of millennials or Gen Z members. And the one thing I've seen some people struggle with a lot is at what time you have a meeting called a daily stand-up or a daily scrum, we call it. And it's first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock. And there are some younger people who have always struggled to come in at that time or to show up at that time because they're so used to sleeping late and waking up late. And so, and sometimes the kindest thing to do would be to simply start the meeting a bit later, where in teams where that is present. And another could be fatigue sometimes or disinterest. And depending on the generation and what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, or some things that they've done so many times before, like they cannot be bothered to do it again. They have that fatigue on it. So I think these are some of the challenges to keep in mind when we recognize the challenges that different generations might face in the workplace.
Thank you. I have an example, which I think is really interesting as well, because I know something you mentioned before was sort of respecting elders and that sort of thing. And I had an example this week where someone who is younger was asked to stand up for someone who was older. They got quite upset because they felt like the person was insinuating that they didn't respect seniority or particularly age, which they did, but they also had an invisible disability and they actually need to sit down. And they got up even though they needed to sit down, but they felt that there were so many assumptions that they were just sort of a young, lazy person who wanted to sit and didn't think about older people. And so the assumptions are both ways, aren't they? And, I think there's a lot of assumption that young people are all fantastic at social media, but that's not necessarily true. Some young people don't even use social media at all. I probably use it a lot more than some young people. So it's also just being careful about all of these assumptions, isn't it, that we can make. Janice, what are your insights?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's interesting because I was just thinking about how we communicate when you're working in an intergenerational team. And I can think of an example with someone I was talking, she's working in a small group in retail. And it just so happens her manager, who's older than her, keeps referring to her as mate, mate this, can you do this shift, mate? And it's not landing well, actually, because she feels that it's kind of not really taking into account, why not use her name, for example? And it's just not landing for her, actually. So it's interesting, just to think about the language you use when you're trying to make that approach, because I think this manager is trying to show that they're approachable and that they're on a level, but it's just not working. So yeah, that I think there is something about the language we can use, and sometimes it's not appropriate perhaps for the older generations to try and appropriate the language of the younger generation. That's not necessarily going to land, just so we can show that we're in with the kids, so to speak. So yeah, but I also think there's also something about, sometimes there's differences in expectations, and I think Joseph and you've touched on this already about how quickly you can progress through an organization, and your analogy of perhaps the older generation would expect someone to take the stairs, and the younger generation expect to take the lift. So I think there's quite a lot there, actually. And then when people decide, oh, you know what, this is not happening fast enough for me, I'm going to move on, actually. So I think that can be a challenge as well. So yeah, those are the only two things I wanted to add at this point. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Janice. Really good points from everyone about, I think we're all illustrating those differences and visualizing them, aren't we, in our minds. So my next question to you is, how can we make them an asset? These differences that we've talked about about them a little bit as an issue, really, but how can we make them an asset rather than a problem? Are there any individual mindset or practical organizational hacks? Me as a Generation Xer, how can I either have more patience for someone, potentially more patience for someone older, or really value someone younger and what they bring? I think we want to engage in a practical and positive way. So I'm going to start right back with you, Janice.
I think it's be really helpful to sort of recognize the differences and find ways to celebrate them, actually, and learn what you can about the different generations, but at the same time not to try and lump everyone in together, because as you said right at the start, actually, you may have some attitudes or attributes of the older generations as well as the younger generation, their excitement and energy. So I would certainly think it's useful to have as many conversations as you possibly can, especially if you're managing a team with the people from different generations, because I'd want to know, what are the strengths of this individual standing in front of me? What can they bring, and what might they need support with, actually? And is there an opportunity to do some reciprocal mentoring, actually, so that people can learn from each other? I think there's something quite magical that can happen when you put people of different generations in the same room. So yeah, that would be my.
Can you just talk a little bit more about reciprocal mentoring, in case that's a new term?
Oh yes, sorry, yes, it's when you pair people up. Actually, you might pair up perhaps a Gen Z with someone from the baby boomer generation, perhaps, or so that they get an opportunity to kind of share their experiences, share their stories in that sort of two-way conversation and relationship. So it gives me, if it was me, it would give me an opportunity to talk to Gen Z. What's the world look like from your point of view? What issues are you facing? How do you feel about your position within the organization? Likewise, they could be saying to me, how did you get to where you are, Janice? And what could you share with me? So it's that kind of two-way conversation between two people from different generations, and supporting and mentoring each other.
Thank you. And I think, Geeta, you also advocate this type of thing. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, sure. So there was a huge global organization that I was working with, and had an opportunity to facilitate a strategy group. And we made, when I was speaking to the senior leader, we made a conscious decision of tapping on this generational difference, because that organization had people from different domains. It was an oil and gas client where there were some people who really had rich domain experience, had been out in the fields, and they were about to retire, and they had a few years left. And at the same time, there were some really great rising stars at a graduate level and things like that, who were really intelligent and brought their own fresh perspective into it. So we decided to form a strategy group with mindful choice of who we brought from the different generational brackets along with the domain and being mindful of the other factors with generational difference being. And we found that every single time we met, it was really a session where different perspectives came together, and it was really a wonderful experience to be a part of and to learn from each other. So I think that was a great decision, and it was something that we did mindfully. And I often, because I work with software teams a lot, we have an engineering practice called pairing that we do. And one other thing we can do pairing could be, so for example, pairing a novice and an expert, not only looking at the skills aspect of it, but if we were to also look at the generational aspect of it and to pair also with that in mind, I think that could be a great way to bring together the assets. And in general, I was mentioning in my introduction about this HR study that sparked my interest in 2017, and some of the HR policies, rather than having a blanket HR policy for everything, for everybody in the organization, to be more mindful of the different, and to have, say, for example, Gen X people, perhaps they might have some carrying responsibilities, or they may be working towards their retirement, maybe. So to be more mindful of the different generations and their needs, and to have a HR policy that flexed to that, I think that could mean that employees are more empowered and they bring their best into the mix.
Brilliant, thank you. Some really practical ideas that can be reasonably easily implemented, if I could say it, into the workplace. Thank you. Joseph, your insights, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. One of what Geeta just said now, I've heard come up for a number of people who are still working, who have youngish children that they care for, but also parents. So it's at both ends, and that can be a challenge, which I think HR and organizations are only beginning to grapple with now, making that provision for them. But in terms of to answer your question, the generations do need each other. I'm convinced about that. And I think for the individual, if one realizes it and then looks beyond impressions to engage with the individual. So many times you hear people describing older generations or younger generations, and the words are quite similar. It's almost like they're being repeated. And I'm saying, look at the individual. So if someone says, that's not for me, then you can ask the question, what exactly in it is not for you? That can give you an insight and give them the message that that you are listening. If someone says, I can't do it, maybe some new technology. So what is it you can't do? Because oftentimes it's an impression that I can't do it. And I guess with our coaching conversations where you ask someone, get someone to engage with the idea first, then asking that person, what can't you do? Could start a conversation. So I think looking beyond the impressions at the individual. I also think focus more on what is common. Oftentimes when we look at differences, we forget what is common. And I know I always blame our educational systems that always give you feedback on what you haven't done right, rather than what you've done wrong. So we begin to look at what is different rather than what is common between generations. And then that gets in the way of focusing on people's strengths. So for example, an individual who is young and able to do many different things at the same time may be the kind of person you want to bring in when there's uncertainty, to have a conversation with them. What can they see? What do they think is possible? That will then draw on their strengths rather than on the same thing that might be a difficulty managing them, but find a way to engage them in that process. Someone who's less risk averse, for example, is probably the kind of person you want to bring in when there's risk to be considered. So I think it's just finding different ways of working with individuals. And that starts in the mind. It is possible in the mind. Therefore, you begin to find ways to do it.
Fantastic. Love that. And Marie, what about yourself in terms of your perspectives?
So I really have enjoyed the feedback from everyone here, and that what really sort of hit home for me was this whole thing around, you know, with the mindset and how it can shift and how we can do that. I'm looking at more of behaviors and developing new behaviors. So if we think about modeling, for instance, so if you have leaders, managers, any of the generations can actually model a certain way of doing something. So for instance, if you're in an organization and you have a leader and they are modeling, say, inclusivity and saying everybody's inclusive, everyone has a voice, everyone's respected, everyone is valuable, then that will, in turn, the teams will start to think in that way and start to repeat that modeling and modeling to others. So it then becomes a kind of knock-on effect. And that could build a really good culture where people will feel that they can build relationships with people that they don't necessarily build with relationships with. I've been delivered a program the other day, and we had a senior leader, a CEO, with one of the younger, probably Gen Z, and actually just having a conversation and talking about something. And that was so everyone was seeing how that was happening, and they were more inclusive with that person. So it can actually happen. It can happen kind of organically as well. So there doesn't have to be, yes, of course, policies are really important. Yes, of course, the culture is really important. It doesn't have to be official. It can be just by modeling a behavior quite naturally.
Brilliant. Love that. And I think 2 points that have come out for me really listening. What do we have in common? And how can I role model how we want to be around the generational differences in the workplace? Are two nuggets I think people can quite easily take back into the workplace. Now, I do have another question for you, but I actually want to jump to a question in the chat, which I think is a really practical question and one that I think that a lot of people struggle with. So someone has said that they want to manage up. So they're part of Gen Z and they want to manage up to senior leadership team or older generations, people in influence. And they often feel that they're not taken seriously because of their age. Any thoughts or strategies that they can employ to be able to influence and be heard and be listened to and be taken seriously? Who would like to respond to that question?
I can respond to that question.
Great.
So when we've started to talk about mentoring, I thought that was really important. But the next step on will be allyship. So what could be really good for this person is to find some allies, find an ally that will put them in spaces that they're not usually in, and also talk on their behalf as well, promote them in those spaces so that people will see, there we go back to modeling, people will start to see that this person is almost sponsoring and actually having a lot of respect and trust and building a relationship, and saying that they can do this, they're able to do this, and celebrating them in spaces that maybe they aren't privy to, and therefore shifting a mindset in that space.
Love that. Any other additions? Yes, Joseph.
I'd like to add something that Marie said, this concept of finding an ally and modeling the behavior. Sometimes when we think of a, say, senior leadership team, there could be an innate possibility that we think of them as a whole senior leadership team, and you see a common sort of pattern that you're noticing, and we wonder, how do you do this? And if what I say gets ignored because of my age, then what do I do? Here, I think sometimes to look at the senior leadership team as individual members and perhaps identify, say, one member there who is more receptive, who is willing to be your ally, or who could model a different kind of behavior and create that sort of a deeper connection with that person offline and get them to understand your views better, show that mutual respect, And that could be, especially if you say that as a Gen Z, perhaps you are in a position of influence yourself, then use that power of influence to create the deeper connection with that individual. And then it's almost like when we walk, we put one foot forward and the other follows. Similarly, if you can identify even one person who is willing to listen to you and to promote your thoughts and give validity in the room for that, then use that as the first foot forward, and then the others might follow.
Lovely. I think Joseph also wanted to say something about this.
Yes, it's quickly often I encourage people when they want to do things like this to look, is there anybody of about your age who is successful at doing this? If there is, you may wish to observe them. What is it they do? And how do they do it? And I think linked to that is for the senior leadership team, you want to listen to you. Why should they listen to you? It's not just because you want it, but find in what your skill set, what you're able to deliver for them. What is any of those individuals going to get from listening to you, perhaps to move their project forward, to move their influence forward? And if that might be the link you then need, you're doing something for them, and in return, they can begin to speak up for you when you are dismissed, for example. So I think it's just finding ways, boxing clever, as they say, finding ways to make that connection and then begin to have your voice heard at those senior levels.
Yeah, thank you so much. Some great ideas there. I think there's also something about in today's diverse workforce that actually organizations who don't hear voices can be cancelled. If there's a high percentage of the client base who are from your generation and senior people are not listening, what are the consequences for them? Are they advertising with the wrong people? Are they doing something that's going to alienate a particular client base? So for me, whenever I think about what's different about me, I think, how can I leverage it? I have, if I was a Generation Z, I'll be saying, I have the voice of young people. You should be listening, because what are you going to miss out on? They might be markets we want to tap into. They might stop coming if we don't listen to them. And so really make myself valuable because I have an ear, a voice that perhaps they're not seeing. So use whatever you have, whatever generation you are, as that superpower, and help people to know that actually, if you don't hear me, there could be some dire consequences for us. We don't want to threaten anyone, obviously, but that idea that actually you could be missing something, and that could really help the organization. So use it powerfully. And the other thing I'd say is sometimes people don't listen to you, whichever generation you are. I think persevere, if is a good thing to do. You take different approaches to saying the same thing. They say saying the same thing or doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different result is a form of insanity. So if I've tried it one way and you're not listening, what's another way I can say it, or who can I say it through, or do I put it in an email as opposed to saying it out loud, etc. Try different approaches and see what lands. Thank you. That was a really great question. And please do feel free to put any other questions into the chat. So I'd like to ask about avoiding ageism and being age inclusive. What can we do if we feel we're being stereotyped, overlooked, or dismissed because of our age? What are the strategies that we can try in those situations? I'm going to start with you, Joseph.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll take the first question about avoiding ageism and being age inclusive. And sometimes we approach challenges like this and look at the individual, but I'm saying consider the system in which we operate in the workplace. The organizational culture can be inclusive or not inclusive. So working on that, what is that culture? Is it a culture that listens to people? I was reading Chip Conley in Harvard Business Review was suggesting 4 ways that an organization can get different generations to share wisdom at work. And one of the 4 ways are offer mid-morning wisdom talks. where anybody could just share the new wisdom they found. And it could be any generation, but mid-morning talks. Recognize your wisdom workers, the people who quietly have wisdom, but only to a few people. When you find out, expose them to other people so that other people can get their input into their wisdom out there. Develop a mutual mentoring program similar to what we've just heard, like budding new people with older, more experienced people. You will automatically most times be putting together two generations. And create an employee resource group for wisdom. So older people, as an employee resource group, that yes, they take care of themselves, but they're also a resource that can be used to tackle challenges or get insights on particular things just by bringing them together. So an organization that does things like that is likely to be influencing to say everybody's views are welcomed. So yes, and for an individual, I think speak to your manager. If it's not your manager, if you're being stereotyped, speak to your manager. If it's coming from your manager, you may need to find somebody else, a mentor, a sponsor, and also that person could give you a different perspective. It may be something how you are showing up that's causing part of the problem. Things are never only challenges are never only one person's challenge. It's usually two-sided. So what other perspective can you get to see how else you can approach it? So involve somebody else to get your perspective, as well as figure out what to do about the stereotype, because the stereotype, we're not boxes. We don't fit in boxes. And all of us, in any box we are put in, there are differences, and you may need to find ways to show how different you are from that stereotype that someone has of you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I just want to say a little bit about the different language we're using today, because we've talked about allyship, mentorship, sponsorship, and just to, allies are people who support you in the workplace. They can be mentors or sponsors or confidants. Mentors are usually someone who's walked in your shoes and has a lot of wisdom about your role and the organization and can give you advice and guidance. A sponsor is someone usually more senior than your line manager who advocates for you, sort of open doors for you, maybe invites you to meetings, talks about you when you're not in the room, tells you about new jobs coming up so you can go for them, but is really on your side and opens doors. And a confidant is usually someone who you can share, be vulnerable with, share when things are challenging, things are difficult, things that you don't know, that you've made a mistake, and know that it's safe and it's not going to go against you. So there are all of these different kinds of allies that you can have in the workplace, people advocating for you. And someone's put in the chat about being from a minority group in an organization, and I think you particularly need allies if you are in a minority group in an organization. So also do think about that. And on top of all of these, there's also a coach, and a coach can be internal or external. And that person is someone who uses the power of questions to help you come up with your own answers, usually to help you meet your goals around your career or around your life more broadly. So just want to clear up, because we've used a lot of language and we're so used to it, we use it all the time.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah. So Marie, your thoughts there on how we can avoid ageism and be age inclusive, and what we can do if we're stereotyped, overlooked, or dismissed because of our age.
So from an organizational perspective, it would be beneficial to think about maybe psychological safety programs for entire teams. So psychological safety is where everyone feels respected, they feel valued, they are included, they feel safe to learn, safe to contribute, and also safe to challenge. And that is a journey, and that is a process. Rome wasn't built in a day. But when it comes to like many of those groups of people who are, well, the Equality Act 2010 has protected characteristics, and one of them is age. So that means those people who feel they're being discriminated against because of their age, they're actually legally protected. So if you want to support people in your organization, there are 9 of those characteristics, as I said. You should think of having a program that could help all of your teams to think in a certain way, make an awareness of certain things that are happening and they're doing. So with a well-being hat on, to think about your self-care and your emotional well-being as well in that space. The simple things like eating and sleeping and exercising are really important. As Joseph was saying, a confidant, or with yourself, you were saying a confidant. We need somebody that we can trust and we can talk to about this situation. And that may be somebody in the workplace, or it may be somebody out of the workplace. Because when we communicate something, what's the saying? You know, problem halved is a problem solved, or something like that. So if we actually start to communicate our feelings to somebody, that could help us. And also, let's think about the context of that. Let's think about thinking about what we're actually feeling, some self-reflection in that space as well. What we're actually feeling, and in what context is that? And then when you've actually done that, you can actually seek some feedback. That could be from your confidant, that could be from your manager, as Joseph was saying. But the communication is key.
Brilliant, thank you. Over to you, Janice. I'm seeing we're running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. So yes, Janice and Geeta, I'd love your thoughts on this question.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll just start with how we can avoid ageism and be age inclusive, because we've talked about mindset, and I think the big thing about changing our mindset is to have a certain level of self-awareness, actually. So we may need to ask ourselves, you know, what stereotypes might I be carrying within myself, actually? You know, what biases might I hold, and what do I want to do about it? You know, who could I discuss it with a confidant, because you need that safe space. But you know, what action do I want to take around that? Because I think we need to own the biases we all have, and you know, so that would certainly be one of mine from a sort of an individual point of view. And in terms of what to do if you feel you're being stereotyped, I would say again, as Joseph was saying, very you know, who could you talk to about this? Who could help you gain some perspective around this, actually? You know, that sounding board. But also I think it's important to remind yourself of the skills and strengths that you have. You will have got to your position for a reason, regardless of your age. And employers aren't wasting their time. You know, they put you in that position for a reason. So that's what I would finish with.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Geeta, your thoughts.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll keep it brief. Some great points have been made. One thing about the psychological safety that Marie mentioned, I've noticed that we could create psychological safety, but then we can also take it to the next level, which is after we create psychological safety and people feel comfortable to voice their concerns or challenges or what they observe, what do we do with it? In some places, I've noticed that people say it, but then nothing happens with it. So to take that psychological safety creation is important, and then also go on to the next step of doing something with it. So that is one thing that we can be mindful of. I'm reminded of a study which was done across different countries in terms of what each country was strong in and where they lied. For example, there were like 6 parameters. One was somebody was mentioning, like, you know, SLT versus Gen Z and things like that, right? One of them is power distance. Each country, like, what is in the culture? Where is the power distance lie? And there could be one element of individualism versus collectivism. What's honored, what's respected, what's frowned upon. And there is also aspect of masculinity versus femininity, like feminism, like, you know, that kind of a difference in different cultures, or even uncertainty. How much do we avoid it? How much do we tolerate it? And another thing Joseph mentioned earlier about the long-term aspect of the generational difference, short-term versus long-term, what is your orientation? And lastly, it could be how indulgent is culture versus what is a restraint we follow. And just to become aware of these different parameters. Sorry, I must have clicked it accidentally. So just to be mindful of these different parameters and to include it in the way in which you tap into the generational strength it brings, I think there could be value in that.
Wonderful. Great comments, great thoughts there. It's a perfect segue, actually, Geeta, because our next webinar is on the 22nd of February, and that is about cultural intelligence and how to become a culturally savvy leader. So the things you talked about in terms of power distance and femininity versus masculinity, you know, different clusters of the world have different cultural values and ways of being. And as a good leader, you should understand that and think about how you bridge gaps. Instead of thinking one way is good and one way is bad, how do we bridge that? And actually, cultural intelligence has been cited as one of the power skills we're going to need by 2026. So it is something so key and great that you brought into this conversation. So I know my colleague Tanya will add the link for the next webinar into the chat, and she'll also add a link to give us some feedback on this webinar, what you thought about it, what we can do better, what you'd like us to talk about in the future as well. So I want to say a big thank you to everyone for attending today, for those who asked questions, for those who added comments in the chat. It's all been so valuable and so helpful. So we really appreciate that. But the big thank you actually goes to our wonderful coaches, all listed in the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, a directory that connects corporate organizations with coaches from diverse backgrounds. So I want to say a big thank you to Geeta, a big thank you to Janice, a big thank you to Marie, and a big thank you to Joseph. Connect with them on LinkedIn, look them up in the directory. They are absolutely fantastic coaches who I personally vouch for. And if you want to find out more about my organization, do go to jennygarrett.global. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been brilliant. I hope you've got something really valuable from the conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next time, hopefully on the 22nd of February. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.